Okay, today I want to show you how to do some common image adjustments in, actually we're going to do it in Adobe, what's called Adobe Camera Raw. And this, even though we're using Photoshop Elements, Adobe Camera Raw is the piece of software that Photoshop and Lightroom both use to open Camera Raw files. And they will work on any files, and the nice thing about it is that um, you can do it with, you can make the adjustments with sliders, and it's very intuitive and very easy. So that's why I want to show you this technique. And you start out by in the open dialog box. Now here, this is the image we're going to adjust, and it's a Camera Raw file, even though it says it's TIFF. Um, but you'll see here is a JPEG, and if we were to click JPEG, it recognizes that as a JPEG and says, oh, we're going to open that as a JPEG. All you have to do to open a JPEG in Adobe Camera Raw is come down here and say, nope, I want to open it in Camera Raw. Then when you click open, it'll do the same thing we're going to do for this file, which is Adobe Camera Raw. So when we open it, okay, this is an image that needs a couple of little adjustments. Um, the uh, the color balance here is not, you'll see it's got a little bit of a color cast, and this is kind of typical for what you run into in interiors. Is there's a light, there's a window, or a couple of windows are actually over here with natural light coming in this direction. And then there's this incandescent spot up here that makes this, it's a much more yellow light, and it makes it look yellow and gives all this whole thing a yellow cast, and we want to get rid of that. Now the way we adjust it, these are the sliders here, and um, there's actually a couple of sliders. There's the basic adjustments, which we're looking at, and then there's the next little tab there is called detail, which has sharpening and luminescence and color. So today we're just going to use the basic ones, and um, the, the adjustment up here is this little slider is the color temperature. And if you just move that slider, it changes the color temperature. Now way over to the left, it makes it too blue because this is towards sunlight, and it just goes too far the other direction and makes it too yellow. And so what we want to pick here, I happen to know that this woodwork is in fact perfectly white. So you can either do it by eye, and if you're, I will mention that you want to have a calibrated monitor, and I'll put some links in the book that show you where you can some example monitor calibration gadgets. That, so that way you'll make sure what you're seeing on the screen is what's going to be other places, and your adjustments in your monitor won't be out of whack, so it makes it look strange. So as I say, you can, like for example, that looks pretty white. There's another way you can do this. There's this eyedropper up here. It's, if you click on that, you can go around, and if there's someplace in the scene where there's a 18% gray, like you could have done a shot with a gray card, and click on that, and it will help you set out. Now this up here looks like, if I click on that, that's pretty good. It didn't change it much, but that's pretty close to an 18% gray. That's just another way you can do it. The other sliders here, things like exposure, is pretty much what it sounds like, just like the exposure on your camera. recovery is, uh, if you have burned out highlights, it's going to try and recover detail in those highlights. Um, and another great, well, and blacks, um, brightness. I won't go into detail with those. They're they're pretty much how you sound. One of these sliders that is really great is clarity, um, and what it is mid-tone contrast. And if you'll notice, if you look what happens when you slide it over, if you go way to one side, there's very little contrast in the mid-tone, so it looks kind of soft and fuzzy. But as you put more contrast into the mid-tones, it gives it a crisp, clear, and that's where the name comes from, clarity. And um, my tendency is always to crank this up as high as looks good, and because it tends to give the image a real pop. And um, the other adjustments, vibrance and saturation, are kind of the same. Vibrance is a variation of saturation that doesn't touch the red tone. It's sort of, if you're working with face tones, it's the thing you want to use. But saturation is another one. You can change the saturation, and you want to take it easy with this, but by increasing the saturation frequently, it adds to the pop. Um, Now the other thing worth noting is this little gadget up here is a straighten tool. You can straighten out, um, you can straighten verticals, you can crop. Um, so this is all in Adobe Camera Raw, and this is all before Photoshop Elements touches it. We are just opening the file, and you see when we get done with these sliders, when we click open, it will be opening it in Photoshop Elements. So this is a good place if it's a little dark, you can increase the exposure. Actually, it's frequently better to use fill light, um, because fill light is a little more delicate, and it attempts to recover the dark areas of your file. So adding a little fill light is the best way to brighten it. Or again, you can use exposure, but you have to be real careful with that. And usually I don't fool around with the brightness or the contrast much, but you can see it pretty much does what it says. Sometimes a little increase in contrast is nice. So then when you have everything like you want it, you click open, and we're into Photoshop Elements. Now, if you would have had an older version of Photoshop, a new version of Photoshop, um, and even when you're in Lightroom, you get those very same sliders, and they work the very same way as they do here. So this is a great way to adjust your images as kind of a final tune-up.